This is Gemara Zevachim Daf Lamid Vav Baruch Hashem. Another exciting day as we wrap up the third parak here in Mesechus Zevachim. We like all the learning to be a continued refuah shlema for Gavriel Simcha ben Miriam Ahuva b'Seich Sha'ar Chayli Yisrael. So we're going to begin. We're about 8 lines from the Mishnah on the bottom of Lamed Hey Amid Beis, a discussion that's going to begin almost random, a new topic, but then it will all circle back around. Says the Gemara Tanan Hasan. We learned in the Mishnah, Ubali movement, and if we have a part of a carbon of a balmum, that the animal is a balmum, therefore it cannot be put on the mizbeach, and if it's put on the mizbeach, it must be removed. Rav Akiva machshir bebali movement. Rav Akiva comes along and says no, that if b'di'evet, if they were placed on the mizbeach, then they could stay there. Rav Akiva is a machshir if the balmum was placed on the mizbeach. Amar Rav Chia bar Abba, Amar Rav Yechanan, lo yechshir Rav Akiva ela bedukin shebayin. Rav Akiva was only meko if there was a cut on the eye, a cataract on the eye. Haylik shirim ba'ifais. Since such a level mum is kosher by an oif. Ushekadam hikdisha esmuma. But it's only when the animal kedusha, the hekdisha was kadam, was prior to the mum. The mum was only later. If the animal developed the mum before it was makdish, then Rav Akiva would be maskim that no, that it would not be allowed to stay on the mizbeach. Says Rav Chia bar Abba, Rav Akiva ilas nekeva, the command the kadam muma lakdisha. Similarly, Rav Akiva is maskim by an ilas nekeva that it says if such a mum came before the hekdisha, and therefore it will not work and it has to be removed from the mizbeach dami. So Maser Rav Zera Hamal mehen bachutz Potter. Says Rav Zera, one who was a ma'aleh, one who brought these items onto the mizbeach is Potter. Hame'eimon chayiv. That's only if you brought the offspring, if you brought the fetus. But if you brought the actual iman, the mother, he would be chayiv. Says the Gemara, what's this case? So therefore it explains the Gemara. If you're going to tell me Rav Akiva holds that by no listen Akiva him also later you don't take it off the mizbeach, then this brayso mani Rabbi Akiva Aliyah didn't also teirade. But if you're going to tell me Rav Akiva holds like the Tanakama that if the carbon is brought in the mizbeach, it has to come down. Hamani, then whose opinion is his brayso going to be? Says the Gemara, I'll explain to you, Amale mihen bachotz potter. If you brought them up, the items, these offsprings, the fetus, outside of the mizbeach, your potter. Hamemure eman. But if you brought them up as part of the mother, then chayiv. So what do we see? We see again in the brayso, we have this oilas chatas, this chatas nekeva or shlamim, and it has nothing to do. It's not discussing the same din of a nekeva of an oila. Ask the Gemara of a mehen katani. It says mehen similar to them. So seemingly the mother is the same thing. So why are you being mechalik between the two cases? Elaima says the Gemara, Hamala me'emure and bachutz potter, hame'emure and iman, then you're going to be chayv. Now we continue the new Mishnah. The Mishnah continues discussing different machshavai zarais, different intentions that can mess up the carbon. Says the Mishnah, shachatu, you did a shchita. Al menas laniach es damai, and the kavana was to leave the dam, oye murav, or parts of the carbon, lemachar, for the next day. Or you had a kavana to take the dam or the imurim outside the Beis HaMikdash. Rav Yehuda Paisal v'chachamim machshirim. However, Hamanas lit and Agabi Kevesh, if the kavana was to place the dam in the ram, shaloi kinegedi aside in the wrong place, or just dam too high or too low, or you had again a machshava that which should have been outside the walls is inside, that which should have been inside is outside. Then what? On the top of Lam and Aleph. Then Sheachlu Tameim, or you had a kavana, someone who's Tamei Shide, Shekravua Tameim, Sheachlu Arilim, someone without a bris milah, Shekravua Arilim, Lishvarat Tamei Sabesach, or you had a kavana that the Pesach will break the bones, Lachle Menu, no, you leave from it raw, Ula Ariv Dam Absul, you'll mix the dam together with something puzzle, kosher, why? She'ein machshava b'iseles ela. We restate the yesod that we've seen that the only time the machshava is passing is by one of two things. Al b'chutz l'zmanoi v'chutz l'mekoymoi. B'pesach v'achatos they will also passel v'shloi l'shman, mimicking the din that we opened up the Masechta with, that a pesach and a chatos shloi l'shman is completely possible. Says the Gemara, okay, what is this Shitas Rav Yehuda? My time with Rav Yehuda, where is this? Amar Rav Elazar, Trei Kraik Sivi. Says Rav Elazar's two psukim. Bin Noiser Ksiv, with regard to Noiser, it says, Kos v'echadayim lo simen ha'boiker. Kos v'echadayim, another pasuk says, Ini when ha'boiker. Emeinu leniach. If the pasuk is not needed for that which you left over, then with him achshavas. Hinuach. Rav Yehuda, Haikra lach Yehuda sai, Bibai. Leilech Letanya b'sar Zevach Teiros Ushlamim. The man who the Torah is teaching us Shenechal Ziyim v'Leila Chalip Ben Uvlade Simura is Minayin Tamlamer U Basar Chatas V'Asham. So says the Gemara. So if this is true, we don't have a pasuk. So Basar Chatas V'Asham Minayin Tamlamer Zevach Minayin the rabbis Shalmei Nazir v'Shalmei Pesach Tamlamer Shlomav Lechamei Toida. So says the Gemara, but how do we know by the chalos and the rekikim by the nazir? How do you know the same thing applies? Tamalaymar says the Gemara, karvu kulan karani bahen lo yeniach, that everyone is included in this lo yeniach, that should not be left over. Says Barim Kain leima kra, the bunch that said lo siru. My love lo yeniach. Why isn't this singular? Ema, it says Gemara, ino inyan leniach teni lemachshava. So you have the extra pasuk you should be able to use for the machshava. Says Gemara, haniach tenuach, haniucha tenach leniach loitzi. My time, my glamemar. So what are you telling me when you took this thing? The time of the Rav Yehuda, Ksavaro, the time of the Yehuda. Matemadim sheminich lemachar shadabaisel avechshil nich lemachar baisel. At the time of the Rav Yehuda, Svaro. It's a Svara. And that's the reason why the other brisa will fit and bolster the opinion of Rav Yehuda. Continues the Gemara to ask, lifting nami Rav Yehuda bekulu. So why doesn't Rav Yehuda argue on all the cases of the Mishnah? Why does he only argue at the beginning of the Mishnah but not at the end? Says the Gemara, Behei Niflig, which one of the latter cases of the Mishnah do you want him to argue? Are you talking about the cases that on the Karban Pesach that he breaks the bones and he eats it raw? But that case he can't argue. Why? Because if chagufei mi mifsal, because would the Karban Pesach itself become puzzle limafreya if he did it? Of course not. So according to Rav Yehuda, there's no reason the Karban Pesach should be puzzle if it's just a machshava to do that which is aser. And what else? Elamai, you're going to tell me the case of the Mishnah that he brought it tamei, or to eat it when it's tamei. Then as well, zivcha gufei mi mifsal, would the carbon be puzzle? Finally, she'echlu arelim v'shekruva arelim. Meaning the Gemara is going through each one of the cases and showing that Rav Yehuda's lamdas would not apply zivcha gufei mi mifsal, and therefore says the Gemara That's the reason why that even according to Rav Yehuda, the machshava in these cases were not possible. Lishnachrina, kol kemine la'arev, lishnachrina, kol kemine. Says the Gemara, another way of answering is according to Rav Yehuda, it's kol kemine. Does the one who does the shechita have the power to make someone who's tamei, someone who's an arel, eat the stuff to make someone do the akrava correctly? Of course not. So therefore, since it's two different people, therefore, Rav Yehuda is going to agree that the kavana of the sheichet, of the one doing the shechita, will not passel up a latter avodah done by someone else. So says the Gemara, we answered up Rav Yehuda. Says the Gemara, okay, so let's go back to those other cases in the Mishnah. La'arev daman b'dam hapsulim, to mix the blood with the blood of something pasul. We said that it's going to be kosher even according to Rav Yehuda. Rav Yehuda l'taimei damar, ein dan mevatel dam. Rav Yehuda holds that one dam will not be mevatel another dam, and therefore, if we have a mixture of kosher dam and not kosher dam, if it's placed on the mizbeach, it's going to be kosher. Rav Yehuda is going to agree that, so therefore a machshava won't mess it up. Litin as anitan lamala lamata lamata lamala, to place the blood in the wrong place. This, according to Rav Yehuda, is also kosher. Why? Rav Yehuda l'tamei damar shalabim kaminami mekaymai krinim bei shalei bim kaymai, we call bim mekaymai. So says the Gemara, v'liflig, there's one case left in the Mishnah we didn't talk about. V'liflig b'nitin b'fnim shenitin b'chos v'nitin b'chos shenitin b'fnim. Why does Rabbi Yehuda not argue in the case of the Mishnah that the blood is placed inside, should have been placed on the mizbeach b'chos, or vice versa? In this case, why would he hold it's kosher? Says Rav Yehuda, binin makaim shemeshulash b'dam. Rav Yehuda holds a yisaid that we had prior, a yisaid that we had back in Daf Chavtes. Yes, I just peeked on the side, I didn't remember myself. That we had back in Daf Chavtes, which is what? You need to have a machshava. In order, it will only be possible if you have a machshava that has a mishulash bidam. There's a trifold, a threefold entity that happens on this place, which is what? The mishulash bidam, bebasar, and ubeimurim. And therefore, if you had a machshava to place the dam inside, or not outside, or outside on the inside, that's only a machshava klapi the dam. But it's not a machshava klapi the basar and klapi the imurim, and therefore the carbon remains kosher. Ask the Gemara, really? Misli the Rav Yehuda Isvara. We're 10 lines to the bottom. The first line is Rav Yehuda. Does Rav Yehuda really hold of this Svara? Vatani, we learned to the Bryce, Rav Yehuda Aimer. Davar Ra, says the Pasik that it's a Davar Ra, it's a bad thing, and that's Riba Khan, Chata Sheshachtu B'darim, V'chata Shenichlas Ablefnim, that comes to include, it's a riboy, comes to include in the Isser, a chatas that was slaughtered, that was shachtat b'darim, or a chatas shenichlas dam lefnim, that what? It's going to be psula, it's going to be pasal. So what do we see? We see that just by having the dam in the wrong place, Rav Yehuda does hold its pasal. Says the Gemara, v'lesler Rav Yehuda shlishi. Now you're saying Rav Yehuda, so the Gemara just proved Rav Yehuda learns from Davar, it's going to pass. The Gemara fires back, but wait, he doesn't hold of the lumdus of needing the shlishi. But it's not Rav Yehuda. Hechlas b'shagig kasher, habem mezid, seemingly, habem mezid, it's going to be apostle. V'kai malan, and we learned, that what's the case, is that there actually is a kapara. So says the Gemara, so hashama hasam ayli ayla. Now in that case, we brought the dam of the chatas bachotz into the Beis Hamikdash. I kiper in, I loy kiper loy. The Rav Yehuda holds that if you got a kapara, it's a good carbon. If not, it's not. Hacha over here, the choshev chashuv. We're talking only a machshava, loy kol shekain. It is not. Is it not pashit? Then in such a scenario, according to Rav Yehuda, it's going to be kosher. So ask the Gemara accordingly that according to Rabbi Yehuda, he seemingly does hold of the Yisayid of Shlishi. So we have conflicting Braisais, and the Gemara is at odds trying to figure out what is Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. So whenever we have, never Gishmaka Teretz, but whenever we have stiras in the Braisais, says the Gemara, Trei Tanoi, Valiba de Rabbi Yehuda, you're right. It's two different Tanoim according to Rabbi Yehuda. Continues the Gemara, delving deeper and deeper into Shitas Rabbi Yehuda. The last line of Lamav Amud Aleph, V'savar Rabbi Yehuda chatas sheshachta b'adaraim. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold a chatas that was shachat b'adaraim yechayev, that the one who did the shchita is going to be chayev? And again, here the Gemara really changes from, we've been discussing pasal, now it changes to chayev. Rashi, as always, fills in the blank that whenever it's going to be chayev, meaning it's going to be malchus. Does Rabbi Yehuda really hold that? V'atani Rabbi Yehuda Imer, says Rabbi Yehuda, Yachal, I would think, Chatash sheshachta b'adarim yechayev, but Talmud Loimar, says the Braisa, Lois is b'chlashem l'kecha sharvis evigomer, called davara, and from there Rabbi Yehuda learns, al davara to mechayvoi, v'yata mechayvoi, for what? Al chatash sheshachta b'adarim. So says the Gemara, you see Rabbi Yehuda, you're not chayiv. Nochas tir in Rabbi Yehuda. So the same teretz, straight tanoi, aliba the Rabbi Yehuda. We have two different tanoim according to Rabbi Yehuda. Amar Rav Abba, continues the Gemara, another din in Rabbi Yehuda. Today's mamish Rabbi Yehuda day. Omaydi Rabbi Yehuda shechazar v'kavoi lepegol. Does Rabbi Yehuda agree that if a carbon was had a bad machshava, what was the bad machshava that you're going to leave it chutz l'zmanai? Does he hold that you can make it pigol through such a machshava during a latter avodah? Rashi spells out what we just said on the third line for the tab. Do we say that a subsequent avodah could make it pigol? We don't say that it was already possible and therefore can't be made pigol afterwards. Amar Rava, 10 lines down, the first one line is Amar Rava, Teida. Yes, indeed. The pigol of Nezrika, lo yiklamu, a machsheves pigol, a machsheva to do something shalei bizmanoi, does not do anything before the zrika, before the dam is dealt with. And yet, when the zrika does happen, it makes it pigol. So what do we see? We see that even though prior it was not, afterwards it could, just like we just said that a subsequent avodah could make it pigol according to Rabbi Yehuda. Says the Gemara, this is not true. Over there in the case that we just proved from Rava, that was one machshava. But by us, it's trei machshavais. It's two different machshavais, two different avodas. So there's no raya. Says the Gemara. Esi Rav Huna le Rav Abba. So again, Rav Abba started off this memra teaching us that Umayda Rabbi Yehuda, that a subsequent avodah makes it pigol. The Gemara tried to bring a raya from Rava. The Gemara just refuted the raya from Rava. Now, so we still have a statement from Rav Abba. Comes along Rav Huna and he asks, Esi Rav Huna le Rav Abba, or, so what's the halacha? La'alter, if the machshava was right away in the same day, kosher, chaz v'chishav chutz l'makaymai, pasal, ve'ein bai kares, it's pasal, but it's not a full-fledged pigol, there's no kares. Chutz l'zmanoi, but if the machshava was chutz l'zmanoi, then pigol and v'chayav lo v'kares. So full-fledged kares. Lemachar. But if there was a double machshava, if he did a machshava to do it in the wrong place, and he had a machshava to do it at the wrong zman, lemachar, pasal. And chazer v'chishev bein chutz l'zmanoi, bein chutz l'mekaymai, pasal ve'in by kares, tiyovta, the Rav Abba, tiyovta. So we see klar in the Gemara, I'm sorry, we missed the words over there. We see klar in the Gemara that the latter machshava, even though the latter machshava should have made it into a full-fledged bagel, it does not. It's possible vein by kares. So tiyufta deravav tiyufta. What do we see? We see that once the carbon his puzzle, thinking weiter, will not mess it up. Amar Rav Chisda, Amar Ravina Bar Sila. Chishev she'achlu tameim. So in a machshava that tameim should eat the carbon lamachar the next day. Chayav, he's chayav malchus. The carbon is pigol, and there'll be krisos for eating the carbon. Amar Rava Teda, the basar of nezrika loy chazi. The basar before the zrika is not chazi. Chimachashev lei mifsal. When the kayin has a machshava, then it becomes pasul. Says Gemara of Elohi, Hasam Zariku Mechzi, Achula Mechzi Klal. It's different levels of chazi, so it's no raya to our case. Amar Rav Chisda, Margala de Pume Derav Mira Derav Dimi, Bar Chinina. Says Rav Chisda, I'm going to tell you a Margala Bepumi, a statement that would Rav Chanina Bar Chisda, that Rav Dima Bar Chanina, would always say. Basar Pesach Shaloi Hotzla, the basar of the carbon Pesach that was not Hotzla, wasn't broiled, it wasn't sleet. Velachmei Taida, or the breads of the carbon Taima Shaloi Horma, that it wasn't have the appropriate shumais, the appropriate separations. Chayavin Aleim Mishom Toma. There's krisos if you eat it while you are tummy. Amar Rava Teda, Ditanya Shel Hashem. The rabbis, I apologize, I see the highlighting just disappeared for a moment. I'll come back in a minute. Says Rava Teda Detani Lefnei Asher LaHashem. The rabbis, Eimurei Kodshim Kalim, there it goes, L'Tama. Kansi Marbe, the Emurim of the Kodshim Kalim for Tama, that a tummy person cannot eat them. So like we just said, that if they does, it's going to be krisos. Almost, what do we see? Afal Gav the Lavine Achilaninu. Yet, so too in our case, you have a carbon pesach that wasn't sleeve, you have a carbon taida that didn't do the appropriate shumais. You're not allowed to eat it still. If you don't want your tummy, you'll be chayiv kares. Says the Gemara, but guess what? He is out of raya. Over there is a murim of the kachim kalim which are chazi ligavaya. Why? Because they're placed on the Mizbeach. Whereas by us, Lafuke Basar Pesach, this comes to exclude, it limits from the case of the Basar Pesach that what? In our case, Shaloi Hutzla, and Velach Beitaita Shaloi Hurmu, to Loi Chazi, they're not fit, Loi Ligvayav Loi Lehedyet, therefore it's not a good raya. Hadron Allah Kol Absalim, we shall return, we should return, we must return to the third parak of Zevachim. We'll pick it up from the fourth parak, Parak Beis Shammai, in the next year, B'siyata Dishmaya.